Nnaji arrived on a dusty motorcycle. He wasn't holding any luggage, not even a small bag. His clothes were old, his face was thin, and he looked tired. When the bike stopped, the rider asked for money. Nnaji searched his empty pockets and said, "Mama, please pay the bikeman." Everyone froze. His mother quickly brought out money to avoid embarrassment. Few weeks ago, the news spread like wildfire that Nnaji was coming back from America after 8 years. Everyone in the village was excited. They had all heard stories about how people who went abroad came back rich, driving big cars and wearing fine clothes. The happiest person of all was Oluoma, Nnaji's fiancée. She had waited for him all these years, even when many men in the village tried to marry her. She always said, "Nnaji is my heart. He promised to marry me when he comes back." For weeks, his mother and Oluoma prepared for Nnaji's return. They repainted the house, cooked delicious food, and even bought new clothes to welcome him. Oluoma couldn't stop smiling. "Finally, our suffering is over," she told her friend Chinyere. "When Nnaji comes back, we will marry, and my life will change." That day finally came. Everyone in the family gathered outside the house, waiting for the sound of a big car. But what they saw shocked them. Nnaji arrived on a dusty motorcycle. He wasn't holding any luggage, not even a small bag. His clothes were old, his face was thin, and he looked tired. When the bike stopped, the rider asked for money. Nnaji searched his empty pockets and said, "Mama, please pay the bikeman." His mother quickly brought out money to avoid embarrassment. Nnaji greeted everyone with a smile, speaking in an American accent that made his words sound strange. But nobody smiled back. His mother was the first to speak. "Nnaji, what happened? Where are your things? Where is your car? Did something bad happen?" Nnaji scratched his head and looked down. "Mama, things didn't go as I planned in America. I'll explain later." Oluoma stood there, her heart pounding. She felt as if the ground was shaking under her feet. What could have gone wrong in America? Why did Nnaji come back like this? Later that night, the family gathered in the small living room. The air was heavy with silence as they waited for Nnaji to explain. Nnaji sat on a low stool, his head hanging low, avoiding everyone's eyes. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Papa, Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't want you to find out this way, but I need to tell you the truth." His mother leaned forward, her hands shaking. "Nnaji, we are your family. Just tell us what happened." Nnaji sighed deeply and began. 2 years ago, I made a mistake, a very big one. I got involved with some bad people. They convinced me to help them move drugs, promising me quick money. I was desperate because I wanted to make it big for all of you. But I was caught. Oluoma gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Drugs?" she whispered. Nnaji nodded slowly. "Yes, I was arrested and sent to jail in America. I spent 2 years there. I didn't want you to know because I knew how much it would hurt you. I begged my friend, Chooks, to keep sending money to you with the little I had saved. I didn't want you to worry or suspect anything." His mother's voice cracked as she asked, "So all those times we thought you were working hard, you were in jail?" "Yes, Mama," Nnaji replied, his eyes filled with tears. "I planned to come back with the rest of my savings, but the American government took everything I had because of my crime. They deported me with nothing." The room fell silent again. Oluoma couldn't stop the tears running down her cheeks. She had waited 8 long years, turning down many suitors, only to hear this. His mother finally broke the silence. "Nnaji, you've made a terrible mistake, but you are still my son. We will not throw you away because of this. We will find a way to start again." Nnaji's younger sister, Amaka, nodded. "Yes, brother Nnaji. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters now is that you've come back. We will help you rebuild." But Oluoma stood up, her face pale. She looked at Nnaji for a long moment before she walked out of the room. Nnaji's shoulders slumped, but his mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "Be strong, my son. Life isn't over. You will rise again. We will get through this together." The next morning, Nnaji sat quietly outside the house, staring at the rising sun. He hadn't slept all night, haunted by his father's harsh words. As soon as the family gathered for breakfast, his father stormed out of his room. "Nnaji," his father said sternly, pointing a finger at him, "pack your things and leave my house. I can't have a failed son bringing shame to this family." His mother's face fell. "Papa Nnaji, he is still our son. Where would he go?" "I don't care," his father shouted. "I sent him to America to make us proud, not to become a criminal. He's not my son anymore. Let him go and figure out his life." Nnaji felt like his heart had been ripped apart. He wanted to beg, but the look at his father's eyes told him it would be useless. Without a word, he went to the corner of the room where he had kept his small bag and slung it over his shoulder. "Mama, I'm sorry for everything," he said softly before stepping out of the house. As he walked on the dusty road, he thought of the only person who might help him, Oluoma. Even though she was still upset, he knew she had a kind heart. When he arrived at Oluoma's small house, she opened the door reluctantly. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she didn't look pleased to see him. "What do you want, Nnaji?" she asked, her voice cold. "Oluoma, I have nowhere else to go," he said, his voice breaking. "My father has disowned me and thrown me out of the house. Please, I just need a place to stay for a few weeks while I figure things out. I promise I won't be a burden." Oluoma crossed her arms and stared at him. He remembered all the promises he had made to her, the dreams they had shared, and how she had defended him when people mocked her for waiting so long. Now, everything felt like a cruel joke. "I don't know, Nnaji," she said hesitantly. "I'm still trying to process everything. How can I trust you?" "I know I've failed you, Oluoma," Nnaji replied, tears streaming down his face. "But I promise to make it right. Just give me a little time." Oluoma sighed deeply. She knew what it felt to have no one. As an orphan, she had faced many lonely days, and the thought of sending him away made her feel guilty. "Fine," she said grudgingly. You can stay, but only for a few weeks. After that, you need to figure out your life. I can't carry your problems forever." "Thank you, Oluoma," Naji said, his voice filled with relief. A month passed, and Nnaji's presence in Oluoma's small house became a heavy weight on her shoulders. At first, she tried to be understanding, but as days turned into weeks, her patience wore thin. People in the village had begun whispering about how she was living with a man who wasn't her husband, and the gossip only made her frustration grow. One evening, after a long day at the market, Oluoma returned home to find Nnaji sitting idly in the corner, staring at the wall. "Nnaji," she began, setting down her basket of vegetables, "I think it's time we talked." Nnaji looked up, his face filled with worry. "What is it, Oluoma?" "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice firm. "You've been here for a month and nothing has changed. You haven't found a job, you haven't made any plans, and people are starting to talk. I can't carry this burden again." Nnaji lowered his head. "Oluoma, I know I have been slow to figure things out, but I'm trying. I don't know where else to go." "Then you need to figure it out," Oluoma snapped. "This is my house and we are not married. I can't keep living like this." Nnaji hesitated for a moment before saying, "Oluoma, maybe we should get married now. That way, people will stop talking and we can face life together. I'll make things right, I promise." Oluoma's face hardened. "Get married? Are you serious, Nnaji? You have no job, no plans, no future. How do you expect me to marry you? I waited 8 years for you, and this is what I get. A man who came back with nothing but problems." Nnaji flinched at her words, his chest tightening. "Oluoma, I know I've failed, but I love you. Please don't give up on me." "I can't do this," Oluoma said, shaking her head. "I won't spend the rest of my life with a loser. You need to leave." Nnaji's heart sank. He tried to plead, but Oluoma's decision was final. That evening, he packed the few belongings he had and left her house. As he walked down the village road, his feet seemed to carry him instinctively back to his father's compound. When he reached the entrance, he stopped. The harsh memory of his father's words hit him like a cold slap. "You're not my son anymore." Nnaji stood there, unsure of what to do. He couldn't go inside, but he had nowhere else to go. His stomach growled, and he realized he hadn't eaten all day. With a heavy heart, he sat down by the gate, leaning against the fence. Tears filled his eyes as he wondered how his life had fallen apart so quickly. As Nnaji sat by the gate, debating where to go next, he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. When he turned around, he was startled to see Princess Eberechi, the only daughter of the king, walking down the path. She was returning from visiting her friend in the village, her royal guard following at a respectful distance. "Good evening, Your Highness," Nnaji said, bowing his head in respect. Princess Eberechi stopped and looked at him. Her face lit up with recognition. "Nnaji, is that you?" she asked, her voice filled with surprise. "It's been years. When did you return to the village?" Nnaji felt a mixture of embarrassment and unease. He glanced down at his worn-out clothes and dusty shoes, avoiding her gaze. "Good evening, Princess. I just got back. It's a long story." The princess tilted her head, concern flashing in her eyes. "A long story? I'd like to hear it. You don't look well, Nnaji. What's going on?" Nnaji hesitated, but there was something sincere about her tone that made him open up. He explained everything: how he had traveled to America, the mistake he made, the years he spent in jail, his deportation, and how he had been disowned by his father and rejected by Oluoma. Princess Eberechi listened intently, her expression softening with every word. When he finished, she shook her head in disbelief. "You've been through so much, Nnaji. You must be hungry. Let me take you somewhere to eat." Nnaji tried to protest, but the princess insisted. She led him to a nearby restaurant, much to the surprise of the owner and other villagers who saw the princess with him. She ordered a variety of dishes, and Nnaji ate like a man who hadn't seen food in days. After the meal, she called one of her guards and instructed him to make arrangements for a small accommodation in the village where Nnaji could stay temporarily. "You can't be wandering the streets," she said firmly. "Let me help you, at least for now." Nnaji was overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, princess. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," she replied with a gentle smile. "Just focus on getting back on your feet." The princess returned to the palace that night, but she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying her encounter with Nnaji in her mind. She remembered the confident, hardworking boy she had known in secondary school and couldn't reconcile that image with the broken man she had met today. "Why do I feel this way?" she wondered. "Is it pity or something else?" The next morning, Princess Eberechi returned to the small accommodation where Nnaji was staying. This time, she brought a basket filled with varieties of food. Nnaji's face lit up as he saw her approach. "Good morning, princess," he greeted, standing up quickly and bowing slightly. "Good morning, Nnaji," she replied with a warm smile. "I thought you might need some proper food to start your day." Nnaji was overwhelmed. "Thank you so much. I don't even know how to repay all your kindness." "You don't have to," she said. "But I've been thinking, Nnaji, you need a job to rebuild your life. Have you ever considered what kind of work you'd like to do?" Nnaji paused, scratching his head. "Honestly, princess, I'll do anything to earn a living. Even if it's just working as a guard at the palace, I'll be happy." The princess chuckled softly. At first, she hadn't thought about having him walk so close to her, but his suggestion made her to consider it. She realized she liked the idea of him being nearby. "That's an interesting suggestion," she said, smiling. "Let me see what I can do." Later that day, Eberechi approached the king with a plan. "Father, I need a personal driver," she said casually. The king raised an eyebrow. "A driver? Why? You've never asked for one before." "I've been thinking about it, and I believe it's time I have someone to drive me around," she explained. "There are many skilled drivers in town. May I handle the process of finding one?" The king nodded. "That's fine, Eberechi. But make sure you choose someone reliable." The princess didn't waste time. She invited Nnaji for the position. When Nnaji heard the news, he couldn't believe it. "Princess, are you serious? You are giving me a chance to work for the royal family." "Why not?" she replied. "You are hardworking and trustworthy. I know you'll do a good job." On the first day Nnaji started as Princess Eberechi's driver, the king, unaware of the deeper connection between them, paid him handsomely, and Nnaji felt like his life was beginning to take shape. However, driving the princess wasn't a typical job. Eberechi often insisted on taking long drives through the village and nearby towns, where they would spend hours talking and laughing. With time, their bond grew stronger, and Eberechi found herself opening up to him about her life, her dreams, and even her fears. One evening, after a quiet drive to a nearby town, Eberechi turned to Nnaji. Her cheeks flushed, and she hesitated before speaking. "Nnaji, I have something to tell you. It's been on my mind for a while now." Nnaji glanced at her nervously. "What is it, princess?" "I think I think I'm falling in love with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nnaji froze, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Princess, you shouldn't say that. I'm just your driver. If anyone finds out, I could lose my job or worse." Eberechi placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression calm. "Relax, Nnaji. I would never do anything to harm you. I just wanted to be honest about how I feel." Nnaji's heart raced. He had never imagined that a princess could have feelings for someone like him. But deep down, he was terrified of what this could mean for both of them. It wasn't long before Princess Eberechi gathered the courage to approach her father, the king. She informed him that she had found the man she wanted to marry. The king, overjoyed, eagerly asked her to bring the man to the palace so he could meet him. The princess wasted no time and invited Nnaji to the palace, telling him that she wanted to introduce him as her intended husband. Nervous but hopeful, Nnaji reluctantly agreed. When they arrived at the royal chambers, Princess Eberechi stood proudly beside Nnaji and said, "Father, this is the man I want to marry." The king's joyful expression quickly turned to one of disbelief. "What nonsense is this?" he bellowed. "Eberechi, stop this joke immediately." "This is no joke, father," the princess said firmly. "I love Nnaji and I want to spend the rest of my life with him." The king's face turned red with anger. A man who traveled abroad and failed. A man who returned home with nothing and ended up as a mere palace driver. "Never! I will not allow my daughter, the princess of this kingdom, to marry such a man." The words cut deep into Nnaji's heart. He felt humiliated and out of place. Without saying another word, he turned and walked out of the palace in anger, leaving Princess Eberechi behind. Later that evening, Nnaji met the princess and informed her of his decision. "I'm sorry, princess," he said with a heavy heart. "I can't do this anymore. I'm resigning as your driver." Princess Eberechi was devastated. She tried to convince him to stay, but Nnaji was firm in his decision. "I'm not worthy of you. Your father is right. You deserve someone better." The princess couldn't bring herself to speak to anyone after that. She locked herself in her chambers, refusing to eat or drink. Days turned into weeks, and soon she fell gravely ill. For the first time, one of Princess Eberechi's demands had not been fulfilled, and it was breaking her spirit. The king, seeing how his daughter had become, finally swallowed his pride. He sent for Nnaji and invited him to the palace. When Nnaji arrived, the king looked at him with a mixture of guilt and desperation. "Nnaji," he said, his voice softer than before, "I see now how much my daughter loves you. I made a mistake. If it will help her get well, I will allow the two of you to marry." But Nnaji shook his head. "Your Majesty, I appreciate your change of heart, but I cannot marry the princess. I'm not worthy of her, and I don't want to be the cause of more pain in this family." As Nnaji turned to leave, the queen, who had been silently observing, rushed to him and grabbed his arm. Tears filled her eyes as she pleaded, "Nnaji, please. Do not let our only child die. If you truly care for her, you will stay. She needs you." Nnaji hesitated, torn between his feelings for Eberechi and his belief that he wasn't good enough for her. After a long pause, he finally nodded. "I will see her," he said. He followed the queen into the princess' chambers, where Eberechi lay weak and pale on her bed. When Nnaji stepped into the princess' chambers, the sight before him broke his heart. Eberechi lay on the bed, her face pale, her once bright eyes dull. She looked nothing like the vibrant woman who had brought food to him and insisted he deserved a second chance. "Eberechi," Nnaji called softly, standing by the door. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment a weak smile formed on her lips. "Nnaji," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nnaji moved closer and sat beside her bed. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" he asked, his voice filled with emotion. "You are the princess. You have everything. Why risk your health for someone like me?" Eberechi reached for his hand, her touch weak but warm. "Nnaji, don't you understand? None of those things matter to me. I love you, and I know you are a good man. I don't care about your past or what anyone says." Nnaji felt tears sting his eyes. He had never felt so conflicted in his life. On one hand, he wanted to walk away, believing he wasn't worthy of her love. On the other hand, seeing her like this made him realize how much she meant to him. Just then, the king and queen entered the room, their faces filled with worry. The queen rushed to Eberechi's side, placing a hand on her forehead. "Nnaji," the king said, his tone softer than before, "I can see now that my daughter's happiness lies with you. I was wrong to judge you based on your past. If marrying you will bring her back to life, then so be it. You have my blessing." The queen nodded, her eyes pleading. "Please, Nnaji, she is our only child. Don't let her suffer because of our mistakes." Nnaji looked at the frail princess and then at the king and queen. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Eberechi's life and the love she had shown him when no one else believed in him. "Eberechi," he said, squeezing her hands gently, "if you promise to get better, I'll stay. I'll marry you and I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your love." Tears rolled down Eberechi's cheek, but this time they were tears of relief. "Thank you, Nnaji," she whispered. The queen embraced Nnaji, and the king stood back, observing the scene with a thoughtful expression. It was clear that Eberechi's happiness revolved around Nnaji, and the king had no choice but to embrace this reality. The king gave him a small nod of approval. That evening, after Nnaji shared his concerns about being disowned by his father, the king sent royal messengers to Nnaji's compound. The king wanted to ensure that proper traditions were followed and that Nnaji's father would accompany his son to officially ask the princess' hand in marriage. When the messengers arrived at Nnaji's father's house and explained the situation, Nnaji's father's face darkened. "I don't have a son," he said bluntly. "If someone wants to marry the princess, that person is not from my family." The messengers were shocked at the response and returned to the palace to report his words. The king was visibly annoyed when he heard the news. How can a father disown his child, especially at a time like this? He asked, shaking his head. Naji's mother, who had overheard the news from the palace, decided to act. That evening she went to the palace and requested to see the king. She knelt before him and pleaded on Nnaji's behalf. "Your Majesty, I beg you, please show mercy to my son," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "His father is a proud man, but Nnaji is a good boy who made a mistake. He deserves a second chance. Please don't let his father's stubbornness ruin his future." The king listened carefully and nodded. "Your words show that you are a mother who truly loves her child. I will not hold his father's decision against him." The next morning, Nnaji boldly entered the palace to speak to the king. He bowed respectfully before saying, "Your Majesty, thank you for allowing me the chance to marry your daughter. I promise you will not regret this decision. I may not have much now, but I will work hard to make sure Princess Eberechi never lacks anything." The king studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "You speak with confidence, Nnaji. I hope your actions will match your words. But remember, marrying a princess comes with great responsibility. You must be prepared for the challenges ahead." "I am, your Majesty," Nnaji replied firmly. Before leaving, Nnaji made one final promise. "Next week, I will come back with my family to formally ask for Princess Eberechi's hand in marriage. Even if my father does not support me, I will find a way to fulfill the tradition." The king nodded, and the queen gave him a kind smile. As Nnaji left the palace, Eberechi watched from a balcony, her heart swelling with pride and hope for their future together. Nnaji left the village, and for 2 weeks no one saw or heard from him. Even Princess Eberechi was unable to reach him. Confusion swept through the village. Whispers spread. Had Nnaji run away? Was he in trouble again? Suspicion grew, and even the princess began to doubt her father, thinking perhaps the king had done something terrible to Nnaji in order to stop him from marrying her. Then one sunny afternoon, a sleek, flashy car drove into Nnaji's father's compound. The villagers, who had gathered to gossip about his mysterious disappearance, froze in silence, their eyes fixed on the scene. To everyone's shock, Nnaji stepped out of the car, dressed in fine clothes, and looking every bit like the wealthy man they had expected when he first returned from America. Gasps echoed through the crowd. His father stood dumbfounded as Nnaji approached his mother and sister, embracing them tightly. Tears streamed down their faces. They had stood by him when he returned with nothing. Then, to everyone's surprise, Nnaji turned and hugged his father. His father, overcome with shame and guilt, stammered, "Nnaji, my son, forgive me. I judged you too harshly. I didn't believe in you." Nnaji smiled gently and said, "Any father might have reacted the way you did. I understand. Let's leave the past behind." The news of Nnaji's return spread quickly throughout the village, and soon Aloy heard about it. Unable to resist, she hurried to Nnaji's house, desperate to see for herself. When she arrived, her heart sank. The man she had abandoned when she was poor now stood before her, successful and more handsome than ever. But it was too late. Ozoemena was already pregnant for her new husband, a man who had persistently sought for her hand in marriage during Nnaji's time in America. She broke down in tears, remembering how Nnaji had sent her money and gifts, only for her to leave him the moment he appeared to be broke. Nnaji looked at her, his eyes filled with both sadness and resolve. "We all make choices, Oluoma. he said. I hope yours brings you happiness. Both cried as they recalled the past, but Nnaji had moved on. Days later, Nnaji and his family arrived at the palace in grand style, their convoy of cars creating a spectacle that left the villagers speechless. In the king's court, surrounded by nobles and elders, Nnaji revealed the truth. I was never deported, nor was I broke, he said confidently. I left America to set up my own business here in Nigeria. I wanted to build something meaningful on my home soil, and I succeeded. But when I returned to the village, I chose to appear poor, to see who would stand by me if I truly had nothing. Now, I know who truly loves me. The royal family was stunned. They quickly realized that Nnaji's wealth far exceeded their own. The king, humbled, gave his full blessing for Nnaji to marry Princess Eberechi. Their wedding was a grand celebration that united the palace and the village. Truly, true love and loyalty are tested in difficult times, not in moments of abundance. Always treat people with kindness and respect, regardless of their circumstances, because their true worth may be hidden.
This is Umma's story time. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I am Amarachi Ihoma, the young storyteller.